providers to make sure that we're working with the community around and support providers to keep them housed. Because we know that when we end that tenancy, they fall back into homelessness. It costs the system a lot of money to get them back into housing. Very focused on the person, not the property in this case, which means we do absorb some risk around property damage, but what we're focused on is keeping that person housed. Housing choices. The National Regulatory Standard says that less than 10% of our end of tenancy should result in an eviction. That's the standard that the regulator holds us to. Our organisation sits at about under 3%, and in this model we're at about 1.5. So for all the most complex of tenancies and the people that are facing the toughest challenges, we're working really hard to keep them housed. I like this slide because it talks about a normal tenancy, where people are well, something happens. It might mean they slide back into unwellness and the tenancy fails. And then we go up here, there's some words missing. On the way back up, that infinity symbol is homelessness. And on the top of it is lots of money, getting them rehoused. Our supportive landlord model means that when people are well, something happens, they become unwell, there's words missing, I don't know where they've gone, but we see it. So we're there all the time and we see it and we call the supports back in and we rally around and we get them back on their feet and we avoid diving into that homelessness pit. Third problem, vacancy rates means that exit from housing is causing homelessness. So some of the solutions we have here in our space is the model that I've just been talking about. In the private sector though, you will have seen yesterday the rental subsidy announced by the state government, which the sector has been calling on for a long time. There are a lot of people in private housing that the rent goes up by $50 and now they're in housing stress and they can't afford that rent and they fall out of housing. So the state government's just recognised that it would be cheaper to help them out with paying the rent for a while and get back on their feet rather than having to give up a tenancy because now I can't afford to pay the rent and now I'm sleeping in the car with my 2 children. So very, very welcome announcement yesterday. Not enough again, but it's something, it's a start, it's a crack in the door. The other thing is tenancy support programs for private rentals. It's not just people in community and social housing that face incredible life challenges, it's lots of people living in private rentals as well. At the moment there's not a lot of services out there that will go in or can go in and help people in private rentals, but to my view, and I've said this yesterday in a forum, getting people who are currently homeless into housing is a really wicked problem because there's no houses, but keeping people who are currently housed in the house is ultimately very, very doable because they're there, we just need to roll in with the support. I don't know how I'm doing for time because I'm okay. The last thing that I want to talk about is coming back to build to rent. So build to rent means everything you build, you rent it out for the long term, it doesn't get sold off. In quite a few of our developments in the past, we might have built 24 and we would have sold 18 down to get our capital back and we keep 6 to rent. In a build to rent model, the whole thing is rent forever essentially. So in the build to rent models that we're looking at now, there is some social housing, there's some affordable housing, and there's some market housing. And through this, we're developing a progressive tenure model, which means when you come into a build to rent as a social housing tenant, you pay social housing rent. You get a job and we say, amazing, this is so cool. Stay where you are, you're not going to disrupt you from your community or your home, but now you pay affordable rent. And then when your partner gets a job and your income goes up again, we say, that is the best thing ever, stay where you are, we don't want to disrupt you from your community, but now you'll pay market rent. So the opportunities here for people in social housing to get out of that poverty trap is really, really exciting, and we will be alongside our other panellists really pushing for that from a people perspective.
So can I just ask, is it the same housing, just
yes.
different rents? So it's not like you move into a larger house.
If you had an apartment building with 100 units in it, there might be 20 social housing, 30 affordable housing, 50 market housing. All I want to do as a provider is keep those ratios. So as a social housing tenant, when you move up into affordable, I go, right, the next vacancy that comes along is a social housing. But you get to stay where you are, you don't have to move, dislodge from your community, pull your kids out of school, because that's the way the system is working at the moment. And as I said, that system was okay when we had 3% vacancy rates. At 0.6 are we now? 0.7? Doesn't work so well. think that's my last one. I'm not going to talk about those. I think I've run out of steam when I hit this slide. And questions later, aren't they?
Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I'll invite our 4 panellists to come up and sit on our panel up here, please, and introduce our 2 additional panellists who you haven't met yet. So Natalie and Stephen, please do come up. We also have Rowan Clark, who is the director of Hesperia, which is a certified B Corporation business. Hesperia is a property developer and works across all property sectors, including residential and public sector developments. Rowan has a broad range of skills within property, investment banking and business development, including having worked at Goldman Sachs, Azure Capital and Wesfarmers. So thank you very much for joining us, Rowan. And we also have Nick Brunsden, who is a leading architect with a number of Western Australian national awards and international awards. Nick Brunsden's studio is a certified B Corporation business, and Nick has a passion for sustainable development. He previously worked as Director in charge of Design WA at the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage. He was a board member of Activate Perth and is currently a Director of Space Market, looking to activate forgotten, unloved and in-between use spaces. Now I think am I taking this microphone? I believe so. How's this going to work? No, this one over here. Here we go. It's okay, Angie. I'm all over it. Then I've got to hold down the one on the left. Yeah. Okay. There we go. Did that work? No. I don't think that was working. In the meantime, we'll do it. Yes, it is. Oh, it is just not closing. Thank you very much. I might start with our 2 new panellists who we haven't heard from, and just ask you a pretty broad question from your perspectives as builders and an architect, just about what's working in government policy, but also what's not working. What could be done differently?
Sure. You go first. Thanks. Yeah, look, first, I mean, furiously agree with everything that's been said as well. I think very strong consensus across the panel, I'm sure. I think to address many of those concerns, so when we talk about what's not working first, probably it's really twofold. We wholeheartedly agree that the community housing sector is a big part of the solution, but to really entice all the other stakeholders into this as well, there needs to be a level of scale. And so the problem at the moment is that when local and state governments out there trying to procure delivery of this product, the way they're doing it, the scale is too small to attract developers, builders, and Nick and I have been working on some projects recently where the procurement processes are so drawn out, you need to spend so much time and energy, and it might only be for 50 to 60 units. And you're not going to get the institutional interest that now they're referred to, whether it be super funds, etc. Even the CHPs to a degree, or that federal capital. I'll get to that in a second. But really, when the state government's trying to deliver this social and affordable housing, they need to be doing it in such a way that they're tapping into, firstly, the institutional markets and the developers and the builders that want to work at scale. Because if they don't do that, they just won't get off the ground. And you're seeing that today. And a big part of that is the federal government capital that's been announced, the funding, the $10 million fund. We don't have a policy at the state government level, and I think this is a great thing for you to advocate for, is we have no policy for that conduit of funding at the moment because we don't have a definition for affordable housing at the state government level. And our procurement processes, again, have not been designed to tap into that federal capital. So what's happening is we're missing out as a state, and it's all going to the East Coast. They're delivering thousands of products at the moment for social affordable, and importantly, there is some market in there as well. So you get a real mix of products that's still attracting that capital, and it's still being managed by CHPs. So you're getting the GST concessions, all the other tax concessions, and importantly, you're getting institutional capital in there as well. So the state governments over there aren't having to carry the full burden. So look, I think that's part of it. It's about the procurement strategy, and you really need to have scale.
Firstly, I just want to say thank you for all coming out tonight. I think community involvement in this stuff is how the solution is reached. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Tony, for putting it together, and some very smart heads here. I think, same with Rowan, if everything was going well at government level, we wouldn't be here, so easy to talk about what's going wrong. For me, housing affordability equates almost directly to housing diversity, and like I think we know in Perth, we are a city that's 200 kilometres long. We don't have an urban growth boundary. Housing in Perth is basically a 4x2 villa that's just plonked on any lot size in any suburb all across greater metropolitan Perth. And so we end up with this kind of monoculture of housing that just doesn't suit anybody, that is financed by banks, that doesn't promote diversity. That means we can't right-size, it means our children or our parents can't move out of their family asset into the same locations. We lose density, we lose vibrancy. So we basically need, I think, if you look at a suburb, an electorate like Curtin, we have all this land, latent land with value that is just waiting to be unlocked. We need to be not scared of density at whatever scale that is. And so, whether it's backyards or, the ability to rezone existing family homes to, incentivise keeping the asset, but, creating additional income streams, whether it's a micro unit out the back or a granny flat or something that can create, revenue streams for the building owner. But then supplementing that with, density, and density done well. I think we talked about before that, density doesn't have to be giant towers. Density can be 3 stories, 4 stories, 5 stories. And that stuff sits very comfortably in an urban environment. Like we all love, Spain and France and these places. We visit there and we go, what a great city, and we think we can't have that back here, but we can. And those are the things that change suburbs and change our living environments and change how we live and feel. Everyone's favourite places aren't, sorry to foreign, aren't shopping centres. They're high street experiences, they're cafes. And when you put people in houses, you put people in suburbs near amenity, these things pop up, these things flourish, and that's what creates great living environments.
Thank you. A question for anyone who wants to take it. Can you tell us more about the build-to-rent model? What needs to happen to incentivise them, and why is it important?
Sure. Okay, so government has made some concessions to try and enable build-to-rent. It's around land tax is a key one. If you're having to pay a significant land tax bill on your build-to-rent property, it eats into the potential return. So one of the big barriers is, and it's the same for all developers, it is generating a required return that will compensate for risk. And what's happened previously or up to now, the way that build-to-rent is taxed doesn't offer the potential to make those required returns. So government is starting to change the tax settings. So cutting the land tax liability, changes to managed investment trusts, and basically creating a playing field that would allow developers to actually deliver the returns that they require. Now, the important thing about build-to-rent, which Natalie talked about, is creating a product that offers security for tenants. So our mum and dad landlord model is very volatile. It's all about capital gains, frankly. The income doesn't seem to be tremendously important, particularly when you've got negative gearing. It's all about capital gains. And so investors tend to get a bit spooked when prices fall and start to sell, or when prices rise, think, I'm going to cash in and make some capital gain, which is what we've seen over the last couple of years. In a build-to-rent model, you're holding onto that for 20, 30, 40 years, so you don't have that volatility. So if we could replace as much of the mum and dad stock with build-to-rent product, that would be great. The downside of build-to-rent, it tends to be a premium product. Because developers have to achieve their returns, rents tend to be quite high. Rents are always also high because it's reflecting the flexibility within that rental product. But there are opportunities, I think, for developers to partner with the community housing sector, for governments to offer certain incentives to actually have a proportion of that build-to-rent stock as an affordable product. So you get a situation like Natalie was saying, no, you've got an ability to sort of transition within the actual building through various different products. So I think it's got real potential. We've seen the impact it's had in the US called multifamily dwellings. it's had a big impact in the UK as well. But if we can start delivering a supply of several thousand build-to-rent units per year over the next 10 years, it's going to make a really significant difference in our private rental market.
I would just add to that, I think that the build to rent for me is the opportunity to change the way we conceive of a house in Australia from being an investment to being a home. So when you can rent with the security of tenure, that means you can rent there for as long as you want to or need to, not at the behest of the whim of a landlord who's using it as an investment. That's the thing that's going to change the housing, the way that we conceive of property in Australia.
But it also reduces demand for ownership. Because if you've got a rental market where it's a long-term tenure, there isn't that necessity to go out and buy. So you're reducing demand and ownership and potentially having a positive impact on prices.
Yeah, look, the only thing I'd add, and Steve can add to this too, but GST, again from a federal level, is probably the biggest, easiest lever that we've got at the moment to solve BTR. So any developer out there at the moment has a 10% impost for that type of product, which doesn't exist in other asset classes. So that's I think a really big lever we can look at too.
Thank you. Natalie, you obviously, so there's this federal money that's potentially available. What can we do in WA to make sure that we actually get our fair share of that money?
I think that the Housing Australia, which used to be called the National Investment Finance Corporation, do I get that right?
Housing Finance Investment
Corporation. So I think that we need to be evidencing to them that we are a strong community housing sector, particularly if we're talking about social and affordable housing. That we've got a strong capability here. We've got good balance sheets. We've got healthy organisations with the expertise to deliver housing product in WA. We are quite behind the other states in terms of how we do social and affordable housing here, in terms of the percentage of social and affordable that we have here, and also the size and scale of the organisations. So we are constantly lobbying state government to assist to grow the sector so that we can be front and centre when that money becomes available. Does that answer your question?
I think so. So just prove that you're good.
Well, yeah, and I think that for state government to do what they can to assist the sector to be there at the front of the line when the money's handed out.
Yeah, fantastic. One for the builders and developers. How are we actually going to get these houses built? What's it going to take in terms of labour or materials, or what are the barriers there, and what needs to be done in relation to those barriers?
Yeah, I mean, it is the million-dollar question. I mean, we're all suffering from the skip shortage at the moment, but I think the answer might be twofold. I think it segues a bit from what Natalie just said. When we're going out and procuring builders or developers for these projects, we need to make it enticing for them. We're in an incredibly competitive market at the moment, and so if we're not making it easy for them, if the tender processes are too long, if we're not offering them the scale, as I said before, then we're not going to be able to entice them. And at the moment, in the higher density residential building sector, there's only 2 builders you can go to now. And that's a really good argument for looking at more of this medium density product where you've got a deeper builder pool as well. So I think that's really important. But they want the surety of a longer pipeline. That's really important as well. And so the challenge, for example, I'm working on a project at the moment where we're talking to NIFIC, the federal housing fund, and the way that these procurement processes have been set up by our state government is there's not the scale, so they're only really looking to put $5 million in. Whereas on the East Coast, every project they're looking at might be 25 to 50 up to $75 million of capital from the federal government. It's the same amount of work for them, whether they're doing it for $5 million or $75 million, so that they're sort of saying, sorry, we're just not interested in WA at the moment because you haven't set up the pipeline to make it interesting enough, or it's the same for the builders. You just need to show them that pipeline of work, and it creates efficiencies, and Nick can talk to this, but you can leverage the design efficiencies and the build efficiencies across multiple projects as well.
I want to put a thing on this, and this is probably where the panel's not going to get consensus, is that, we can... I'm going to be the bad guy. That, you know, we can build houses, but we've also got to talk about the quality of the houses and then what that does to our communities and to our ecologies. What we're doing currently, if you look at what's happening through cities like Stirling, where we're taking existing houses, knocking them over and putting 4 of the same house, you know, eave to eave, wall to wall, knocking out all the existing biodiversity, making hard pavement everywhere. We're losing any water penetration into our aquifers. We're losing, creating urban heat islands. We're actually creating increased mortality. So these are actually really big issues in terms of the housing that we are currently providing. So I'd like to put something that sits over the top of this, which is, you know, this is the planning system, and it's, you know, having good designers and good people that can actually read houses and, you know, read plans and understand what design quality is. But there needs to be incentives in the way that we do things, where good developers, good housing providers are actually incentivised to do the right thing and get rewarded through with quicker planning processes, like whether there's a, you know, like a good design triage unit that, you know, if you are keeping existing trees or you're maintaining an existing dwelling and all the embodied carbon, you know, you actually get preferential treatment. It doesn't get 10 times harder like it currently does. And that's why we're getting these results that we're getting through our suburbs.
And the downstream benefit of that, and the downstream benefit of that is that if you're on a low income, then the sustainability of that housing means that your house running costs are reduced forever.
Yeah.
On that, yes, we'll finish up and then we're going to go to questions in about 3 minutes, okay? On that, is faster approval processes enough of an incentive on good design?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because
okay.
you reduce your holding costs, and Rowan could talk to all these things, and, you know, you increase the likeliness or the likelihood of clients to want to support good design outcomes because they know they're not going to be subject to whatever it becomes, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, 9 months longer.
That's pretty cheap, isn't it? Yeah. We'll go to questions from the floor now. Do you want to do that? This one.
Thank you. I'm appreciating what I'm hearing. It's fascinating. I've been in surveying for over 50 years and doing subdivisions. I've got quite a lot of ideas, but you know, I don't want to be negative, but you're talking about people, you know, as their circumstances improve, their reward is that they pay more rent. And I can't see, I wonder, are there not people there who see no reason in improving their circumstances if they're going to be punished by paying more rent and not get better off?
Should
Should I just talk loudly? Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Save me the walking.
Hear your model.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, that's a great question. But the thing that I don't want to do, though, is to crush aspiration if you have it. And you're right that 80% of our tenants are on statutory income at the moment. About 56% of our tenants have a disability. About 57% of our tenants are over 55. So I know that lots of them don't want to and really comfortable having a home for life in a social housing home. But we've got some young people in our houses that should be aspiring.
But I'm thinking, you know, if you've got something and then if your income goes up, can you move to somewhere where you're getting more for your, you know?
Yeah, no, and I agree. It will look like a disincentive, but we're hoping that we will be able to implement a scale that helps you get there. And most of the people that we ever end up saying you need to move out, they're like, well, we're happy to pay market if we can just stay in our secure housing with a landlord that understands what we need. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
as best I can.
But presumably, Natalie, in that their disposable income also goes up.
Yes.
Yeah. So they are better off even though they're now paying market rent.
Yeah. So in our affordable band, it's 30% of your income. So your income's a bit higher and you get charged 30%. And then the next step from that is 75% of market. And then once you're exceeding that, I think you should be paying market rent because the social housing then should be reserved for people who need it.
But the current situation, absolute disincentive to improve your conditions whatsoever.
Yeah.
There's nothing there. At least in that sort of model, you've got a period where you can transition in, and you can stay in the same building, or you can transition out. You're not just out of the door.
And the other part of that is we know that people might get a job and do really well, and then something happens, And the safety net is being able to step back down through those stages if they need to regroup and then step back up again.
The public housing income limits are the lowest in the country in Western Australia. We're almost half of what you can earn in New South Wales, so we really need to have a significant look at that. A couple can earn twice as much money in New South Wales and stay eligible for social housing. It's a big problem in this state.
This isn't quite so connected to affordable housing exactly, but I'm also wondering how much of an impact and how much thought is being put into, I think it was brought up a couple of times, but just building areas correctly, especially suburbs, because one thought that I was having is, let's say we have the situation where we start building more dense housing, we start getting more people into smaller areas and stuff like that. There's still going to be a significant amount of space requirements that is needed for, say, if everybody wanted to own a car, for example, they want to go to different places such as, say, here, there'd have to be a major amount of spaces for them to park. So is there also thought going into potentially giving what people need to live their day-to-day lives in a small enough area that maybe you might have only, say, one car between two people or one car between a family, for example?
Yeah, well, this is all the argument for density, right? That you put density in the right areas. You put it around transport, you put it around parks, you put it around jobs, so that the reliance on cars completely dissipates. And then if you've got an urban growth boundary, or you're not still doing sort of land releases, you don't have to build as many roads. Main roads here, I think, spends, 90% of the budget of all federal transport modes is spent on roads, and none is spent, it's like, I think 2 or 3% of the budget. 3% is on bike infrastructure.
Haven't you heard of Metronet?
Yeah, but I think this is a
The budget's blowing out.
Yeah, but I think it's actually, it's good you raised Metronet, because I actually think this is a great argument for putting density, particularly community housing, around the new Metronet infrastructure, because as Steve said, you've got all this land around $1 billion in infrastructure, and no one as a market developer is going to go in there and build housing, but it's the perfect location for social and affordable housing until that land value goes up. The worst thing the government could do is go sell that land today and lose the value in the future. To the gentleman's point, reduces the need for cars. It's a really efficient way of building on those sites. It's yellow dirt ready to go. But I think that's actually where the government should be incentivising development for social and affordable housing. It's around those Metronet nodes.
It's interesting, I was at an EV conference last week, and the key speaker at the conference made the point, EVs are not the solution to transport emissions. Getting rid of cars is the solution. And maybe we need a quarter as many cars, and they should be EVs. Unfortunately, it's a much harder sell to say, we're going to get rid of your car.
So on the East Coast, there's a lot more development with car sharing.
Yeah.
We still rely on one car, two cars there. Yeah, a lot of car sharing, and that will come here as well.
Well, it was the same argument with what happened with Spotify, right? Because we all own CDs, and and then in over 3 years, you don't own music anymore, and that'll come very quickly here. The car ownership, and we'll have built all these apartment buildings or housing with big basements that are locked up that you can never repurpose, or garages that are 30% of our floor areas, which are bedrooms for cars. And in 5 years, 10 years time, we might not even need them, and it's just really lazy, bad design.
Peter?
Natalie, my name is Peter. I really like your idea of the landlords living in those, I just forget the term you use now.
Supportive landlords?
Supportive landlords. Now, so my head is going nuts. Like I know a widower and a widow who would be perfect in that role, living in houses. So they go into that role and they rent their houses out. So I'd love to talk to you more about who those people are, and because I can think of lots of people that would be interested in that. It's almost like, if I'm hearing it right, it's a pastoral care role in...
Sort of. There's nothing I love more than saying that someone likes the idea of that. So I'd really love to.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Because I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, thank you.